Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 8 a.m. I'll call the meeting of July 13th, 2023 MMSD Commission to order. Welcome to all of our guests. Janelle, would you like to go through the virtual meeting guidance?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Howell. Good morning, commissioners, members of the public and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all to please follow. Number 1, please ensure your mic is muted unless you are speaking. Number 2, please state your name before speaking. For those who are speaking, please have your cameras on if possible. You may turn your cameras off if you're experiencing technological challenges. And number 4, as a reminder, the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host. And this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. With that, let's have a great meeting, everyone, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. Okay, let's see, announcements. Bill, do you have any announcements?
I have just one here at the start. In a few minutes, Commissioner Wilson is going to pull a sewer extension off of consent. There's no substantive problem with the extension, but as I understand it, the way the extension represents future development could be misinterpreted. Commissioner Wilson will explain the details, but I'm mentioning it here just so everyone knows this is not coming as a surprise to us. Kurt Sauser of my staff and Commissioner Wilson worked on this yesterday, and we have some updated corrected documents. So you'll hear more about that in a moment. You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Thanks, Bill. Any appearances by the public? Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand, so we'll move to the consent calendar. So what item do we want to pull off and then consider separately as?
Yeah, it's Wilson and Tom. So it would be the sanitary sewer extension plan for the Simon Crestway extension in Wanakee. That's the only one I have a problem with. Other people may have other concerns.
Yeah, I understand.
That's the only one I have.
Okay.
And then I can speak to that when we consider.
Okay, so that is part of D, correct? It's one of the.
Yes, just the one in D is all I had the concern was with.
Okay, so the other ones, so that was the Red Tail Ridge. And so Simon Crest and Hudson Avenue stay on.
Yeah, it is Simon Crestway. The Wanakee.
Oh, okay. Simon Crest goes away. Red Tail Ridge and Hudson Avenue stay on.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry I had that wrong. And so does anybody else have anything, questions or anything they wish to take separate action on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, so we're voting on items 3A through 3I, except for that part of D, which is Simon Crestway extension. So that will be considered separately.
And it's Wilson. I'll make that motion that we approve, just to approve the consent calendar items just as the chair described.
Okay, so motion by Commissioner Wilson to approve the consent calendar as described with all items except for part of item D, which is Simon Crestway extension. Do we have a second?
Hi, Tom.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ezra.
Commissioner Myers or Murphy.
Okay, so I think we'll go with Ezra on that. It was hard to hear who was who. Okay, so we'll go with motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Meyer to approve the consent calendar with that one item under item D being removed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None, motion carries. Okay, so that will take us to a separate action on the Simon Crestway extension. Tom, do you want to explain?
Yeah, sure. And Kurt is on here as well. Hopefully he can pull up the language for a revised resolution and revised map, because I can't. And he did it, so it should be good. So what what happened is in the original resolution, there was some communication between Kurt and the engineers. And I think there was just some misinterpretation about what Wanakee was trying to do. I talked to you're going to love this. This is what a former government attorney does when they are faced with, as a commissioner, an issue that, is troublesome from my former position. I talked to the village president, the village administrator, the village engineer, who is Kent Strauss at Strand, and the village attorney, besides a couple people at the town, and then dealt with Kurt. And so what you're seeing here is the Simon Crestway extension that the village is trying to do. They are extending the sewer from where it stops now on Simon Crestway, where it intersects with what is Waterwheel Drive, to kind of the end of this private roadway at this point, to serve the area that's shown in blue there. There's a new business that's going in there in Wanakee, and the sewer needs to be extended to do that. So what the village does, of course, is they're going to extend it all the way to the end of that property. The map that we had indicated a service in the town, and they do not want to do that. That is not something that they want to do, nor indicate that. They only want to serve property in the village with this extension. And why is that important? Because if you look at the resolution indicates the area to be served is in the urban service area. That area south of the village line is not. It also indicates the comprehensive plan for the village would indicate that was going to be developed as either commercial or residential property. It is not. So to make it accurate, we changed the map, and then Kurt maybe can show the language with a revision that just indicates that this should be serving areas in the village. And if the village at some point wants to extend beyond that, they told me they would be happy. It's just a miscommunication between the engineers that provided the information and the mapping, and Kurt, who's trying to be as accurate as he can be. But I would say that there were a lot of hairs on the back of people's necks that were raised when that was seen. But all smoothed out by Kurt making a couple simple changes, and I would move approval of the sewer extension with this resolution as redrafted and the map as attached, because that is consistent with what the village intended.
Okay,
That's all
you,
I have, Tom.
Yep, thank you. So basically, it's to make it consistent with existing boundaries of the urban service area and everything else, and the town's
Yes.
desire not to have it sewer service to their area at this point.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson to approve the revised Simon Crestway extension with the resolution as shown on the screen currently. Do we have a second?
Hi, Tom. Commissioner Clark, I'll second that.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Clark to approve the revised Simon Crestway extension. Any further comments or discussion? Okay, good catch, Tom. Seeing no further comments or discussion, hands raised. All those in favor of approving the Simon Crestway extension as revised, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? None. Marcia, I just saw your hand. Did you have a comment?
No, I thought you said raise your hand, so I did.
Oh,
One thing I will indicate on this is I also talked to the developer's attorney for that building, and he said, Tom, you're a pretty good commissioner. I didn't even know that anybody read any of those consent agenda items. So anyway, just a little pat, and I know we all do, but that was something that I appreciate all the work that Kurt did to fix that, because he did take some time and he double checked things, and I appreciate the work that he did to make sure that we got that accurate. And thanks everybody here too for supporting that change.
no, thank you, Tom. You should get another per diem for all your work the other day. Okay, so
It was
then we'll
talking to
take this-
people that were good to talk to, so it was just it was fine.
That's a lot of phone calls, yeah. Okay, So that will take us to our topics, where we have one topic today, and it's the presentation of the 2024 draft capital improvement plan. Bill and Todd, I think, are going to kind of tag team on this.
Yep, Todd will kick it off.
That is correct. Thank you, Commissioner Howell. I hope everyone can see my screen and my presentation.
There you go. Yes.
Okay, great. Yep. If so, you're looking at the cover page for our 2024 draft capital improvements plan. I'd like to first start off by thanking our resource team for putting this document together. As always, it looks great, and it'll be posted to our website after the meeting. There is no hard copy available, but I encourage everyone to read it. It's a really nice looking document. So as Commissioner Howell mentioned, we're here to provide an overview of the draft CIP. Topics we like to go through. I will cover just a brief introduction to the process, cover some of the major highlights from the 2024 plan, walk through some of the major capital projects, and then I'll turn it over to Bill, and he'll conclude the second half with our financing plan. So to begin with, introduction for maybe commissioners who aren't familiar why we do a draft plan. Usually at the first meeting in July, we introduce the draft CIP to the commission to get their review and input of the plan. We take those comments at the second meeting in July then and incorporate them into the final document in the fall. It's important to note the draft CIP does not authorize any spending. It's just for informational purposes. But it does do a good job of showing the relationship between the three funds and having some information about each of them. So it definitely has information about the capital fund, as well as the debt service fund. And also we have included some information about trends in the operating fund so we can estimate service charge increases and give you an early preview of what you might be seeing in the fall. So just by this crude schematic here, 95% of our revenues to the district come into the operating fund. So besides operating expenses, some of that money then also goes into the debt service fund to pay off debt service on our loans for capital projects. And then some also goes as direct transfers into the capital fund to fund projects directly. Besides that, then other revenue sources are, of course, loans from the Clean Water Fund, which for the 2024 plan make up about 70% of revenues. And then we get a much smaller amount of revenue from connection charges and also interest in the fund. So some of the highlights that emerged when putting the plan together, the first is project costs. Costs are definitely going up given our current economic climate, although they seem to be getting a little bit better. Staffing remains a concern as we have higher spending levels in the next couple of years. We've looked very closely in this plan at our ability to execute the plan. And then finally, you'll see that levels of borrowing have increased in this plan relative to the 2023 plan. So a word about inflation and project costs. This is hot off the presses in today's paper. You see that inflation reaches a 2-year low, which is great news. And certainly the trends are going that way. This is a graph of core inflation, which excludes food and energy, but you see that it peaked last September and is down to levels around 5% right now. For the CIP then, projecting inflation, we inflated every year of the 6 years of the plan. We're taking a fairly conservative approach, keeping it at 5% for each of the next 2 years. In 2026, dropping it to 4%. And then the last 3 years of the plan returning to more normal levels of 3%. And the reason we're taking a conservative approach is that we continue to see cost volatility in many of our projects. By way of example, on our Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor project, comparing 2 phases which are right next to each other up near the Epic campus in Verona. In phase 4, which was completed in 2018, we paid about $145 per foot for 30-inch pipe. The estimate for phase 5 is now $650 per foot. So a substantial increase in basically the same type of work. Another area where the current economic climate is having an adverse impact on the CIP is connection charge revenue. As a reminder, this is the revenue that we collect from new development to pay for costs of extending service. And what you can see on this chart is collections over a typical year by month for 3 different time periods. So for this year through July, for last year, and then as a 5-year average. And the first thing that stands out is our revenue target this year is $4.6 million, but through July, we're only about 1.5 million. So we'll probably fall well short this year in connection charge revenue. And while it's still a minor source of revenue for the capital fund, we often use that money to fund, small $1 to $2 million projects, and we won't have that revenue available this year. So we've lowered those projections going forward in the 6 years of the plan. Also, project costs are being affected by the Clean Water Fund. This is our primary or our loan source of borrowing. So we keep a very close eye on it. And while it's great that the bipartisan infrastructure bill injected a lot of money into the clean water and the safe drinking water programs, $900 million, it also comes with certain requirements. And one of those is now that all iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials have to be produced in the United States. So at least in the short term, we feel that means that our project costs are going to go up quite a bit as sourcing ramps up, so to speak, to meet the need. Project drivers is something is new to the 2024 CIP. It's not in the draft version, but it will be in the final version in the fall. And what this is meant to show is basically the different categories, the reasons why we're doing our projects with spending over the 6 years of the plan. So not surprisingly, you can see that condition accounts for about 2/3 of our spending. Again, this is the story of aging infrastructure and our need to replace our assets, many of which were built in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then also capacity is by far the second biggest reason why we're doing our projects, and to a much lesser extent, resilience and regulatory drivers. This chart shows those 6 years of spending that we're projecting by year. Green is our budgeted expenditures, and blue is what we've actually spent in the past. So the first thing that jumps out again is the spending in 2024 and 2025, relatively high levels of spending. And the primary reason for that is that many of our projects are moving from the design phase into the construction phase, where you'd expect higher levels of spending to occur. And also just as I mentioned before, the higher construction costs or the higher costs of our projects in general. So we have looked very closely again at that from a staffing perspective, but we feel good about it while it's ambitious, because if you recall, last March, the commission authorized the addition of 3 new project engineers, 2 of which of those positions have been already filled. So we feel like we can execute this plan in the next 2 years. And going forward, those dollar amounts are less certain, but we've included the higher spending levels in our financing plan as a conservative measure. The other thing I'll point out on this slide is that you see in 2022 and 23, we underspent our budget by quite a bit. There's a couple of primary reasons for that. The first, again, is the staffing levels that I mentioned. We were, I guess, understaffed during those times to deliver those projects. And also we were going through a transition in our director of engineering during this time. This chart shows this, again, 6-year spending, but this time broken down among spending category in the CIP. So if you'll recall, there's 4 spending categories: projects at the treatment plant, in our interceptors, our pump stations, and capital expenses, which are essentially planning expenses. So the thing to take away from this slide is that relative to the 2023 plan, a greater proportion of our projects will be undertaken at the treatment plant, going from 44% in the 2023 plan up to 57% in the 2024 plan. So next, I'd like to walk through some of those projects are, so you can get a feel for them. The backbone of the treatment plant projects will continue to be the liquid processing facilities plan. This planning document was completed in 2017, and it recommended 24 separate projects that deal with processes that affected liquid stream in our treatment train. So those projects are packaged in 3 phases: the near term, midterm, and future. We completed phase 1 in 2021, and now we're moving on to phase 2. So the phase 2 projects will deal with our activated sludge system, which, if you don't know, are the long rectangular tanks in the center of the plant. And essentially, these are used, the blowers, which are shown in this photo at the upper right, blow air or dissolve oxygen into the tanks where the bugs use them to break down the nutrients in the wastewater. So a couple of things to note here. Number one, this secondary treatment system is the single largest user of energy at the treatment plant, very large energy demand. And second of all, the system is very old. Most of the equipment was built during the 7th edition in 1986, which puts it at almost 40 years of service. So the goal of this project then is to essentially replace that equipment, at the same time introduce a process that uses less energy or lower levels of dissolved oxygen. It sounds good in theory, but it's not so easy because this method hasn't been widely put into practice. So as you'll see here, we have a project called Partial Plant, where we'll introduce the changes on a smaller level, affecting only 25% of the plant. Put them in for a couple of years, see how things go. If all goes well, we'll expand the changes to all the full plant in 28 and 29. After the phase 2 process improvements, we'll move on to phase 3. This will deal with our improvements at our headworks facility, which is located at the south end of the plant. And this will deal primarily with changes to our fine screening process. Incidentally, this is a project that I worked on when I first started the district back in 2003. I took this picture of the screens going in the screening channels, and I can attest that these screens look a lot better today, or back then, than they do today. This is an extremely harsh environment. These screens take a beating from rocks, grease, and other things that come into the plant. So after nearly 20 years of service, it's time for them to be swapped out. This phase also involves changes to our grid processing equipment and a new septic receiving facility. Just downstream of the headworks facility is our flow splitter. As its name implies, this structure takes flow from the headworks facility and then splits it between the west and the east sides of the plant. And as you can see in the photo, you can see the problem right here is that there's very turbulent water right now in the flow splitter. And turbulence is bad in wastewater because turbulence releases hydrogen sulfide from the water, which then forms sulfuric acid, and then which attacks the concrete in the structure. So this is kind of an emergent project for us. Design started in 2023 by Strand Associates, and we hope to construct in 2024 and 2025. I should also note that the project budget for this project increased by a factor of 2 since last year. And the primary reason for that is that since we're dealing with all the flow that comes into the plant, it's very complicated to divert it around the structure while we're making the improvements. So that's why the cost has gone up dramatically. This next project is the single biggest project cost in this category, heat and power improvements. This project comes out of the 2020 Energy Management Master Plan that was completed in 2021. And if you recall, the driver for this plan was basically, as we replace our energy assets at the plant, how do we do so in the most energy efficient manner? And a good example of this is the engines that we use, the gas engines that we use to generate electricity at the plant, which you see in the photo at the right. We've had a lot of trouble with these engine generators over the last 10 years. They've been rebuilt several times. So the 2 recommendations that came out of the plan were, 1, to keep generating electricity the way that we do, but replace the equipment with modern equipment, or to clean the gas and sell it for regional distribution. So those 2 alternatives will be advanced in the next stage of the project, facility planning, which will be undertaken in the next 2 years. Hopefully design the 2 years following that, and then construction in 28 and 29. So this is a very complicated process, a very long project, and I'm sure there'll be further updates as we go along. And then finally, in the treatment plant category, the last project I wanted to mention is the MetroGrow operations improvements. This is new to the 2024 plan. And essentially what the goal of this project is to improve our capacity and our efficiency in hauling biosolids to egg fields. Right now we have 2 facilities for loading biosolids. The first is across Southtown Road outside the main plant, what we call our vehicle loading building. And then, of course, another loading station right by our Metro Growth storage tanks, which you see in the picture at the right. Right now, other than just the distance between these 2 points, which makes operations difficult, we're running out of capacity at the vehicle loading building, and also it's difficult to maintain and store the equipment there. So the goal of this project then is to consolidate operations near the storage tanks, build a new fleet building. And then another advantage to doing that is that when the vehicle loading building goes away, there's opportunities here to relocate Southtown Road. We've had preliminary discussions with the city of Madison to do that. And that would free up space for us to expand our digestion facilities in this area, perhaps introduce high-strength waste receiving at this location, and also the heat and power improvements, which I just talked about. So a lot of moving parts to this project. And again, there'll be further updates as we go along. At this point, I think I'd like to pause. It's a lot of information, just see if there's any questions before I move on to the interceptor categories. So I'll just take a little bit of a pause there.
Okay, do we have, I'm trying to get my screen up. Okay, do we have any questions?
I see a few hands raised.
I was trying to find them. They didn't pop up.
I think it went Beth and then Marcia and then Ken.
Okay. Oh, they're there. Okay, so Beth, Marcia, and Ken, why don't we go in that order? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Nice presentation. I appreciate it. I just have a question about the energy savings potential in the liquid processing low DO. You mentioned that it would be energy efficient, more energy efficient, but I'm just wondering what kind of savings we might get in the energy in going to a lower DO need.
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the exact amounts. I don't know if Alan or Eric, are you on the call? Could you? We're in the early design stages, so I don't know if those exact numbers are known yet. But I wonder if Alan or Eric would be able to provide that further insight into that.
We
Yeah,
could
I
also
was-
make a note of the question and bring it back to
Yeah.
discussion next meeting if they're not ready.
Okay, yeah, the reason I asked is I'm just, thinking, in our overall energy plan, that might be something we'd want to include in that if the savings are significant. That's all, just
Sure.
thinking about that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Marcia?
I'm going back a phase in the discussion. When you mentioned that connection fees are going down, it
Mhm.
made me wonder about like the future of new subdivisions in our service area. Like at some point, do we fill up all our land with, new housing and we've then filled it, we've served it? Or have you looked at that question?
That's interesting. I thought about that as well. But I don't think we haven't done a comprehensive analysis, but essentially, yes, we're running out of areas to collect from. But I don't think that day is quite here yet. Revenue, actually, connection charge revenue has been fairly stable over say the last 5 to 10 years. So I don't think that day is here yet, but it is coming.
Right, considering that we, like have our equipment go to its full life cycle, it seems like it's something we could start studying. So that sounds good. Thank you.
I want to add a point here, Todd, for Commissioner Rommel's benefit. The thing to understand about connection charge revenue is it is how we recover the costs that we already spent for growing to serve a new area. So it is tied to the growth itself. So as eventually growth in our region slows down, this is a long way in the future, just to be clear, spending to serve new growth will also slow down. So connection charge revenue dropping will sort of match that lower spending need.
Thank you.
Okay, Ken?
Hi, Todd. Commissioner Clark. I just had one question. I think you had a slide in there that connected the forecast for the capital improvement plan with estimated percentage each year to rates. Was that like 4 to 5%?
I don't recall that.
Maybe I have that wrong. Right.
It might have been the fund flow diagram at the beginning.
This one?
So, all right, if I have that incorrect, my question is what effect on rates? What's the forecast on increase in the budget due to the capital improvement plan?
That's my
Yeah,
presentation.
I think
We
I'll
gotta
save that
wait
for
to get
Bill.
through
Okay.
Todd's-
Yeah, I don't want
Alright.
to steal Bill's thunder here
I'm good with that.
and ruin people's day either at the same time.
To be clear, what this diagram is showing you is the percentage of our revenue that passes through each of each of those sources represents in a sort of typical year.
Correct. These are the percentage of revenues that we will get for the 2024 plan from each of these sources.
Okay.
Okay. Greg, you have your hand up?
I do. This is Greg Freeze. Morning, Todd and Bill. This is a question. I suspect this is a question for Bill, but it's kind of a technical thing. So Todd, you mentioned in your presentation that over the last 2 years, we have, not spent our capital budget authorization by, a pretty wide margin. I think you just had that slide up, right? We're call it half-ish over the last 2 years. So I am curious from a budgeting standpoint, what happens to that authorized capital funding? So at City of Madison, right, as Alder Rummel will know, if I get budget authorization in 22, but I don't spend it all, that authorization hangs forward off book. So then when I do the next budget, right, I will ask for more money, but the budget won't necessarily show that I have, in the last 2 years cases, for example, the odd 25 million hanging out in authorizations from prior budgets. So I'm curious if that's how the district's budgeting works, or if you have to come back and ask for that money again in the next budget cycle.
This is an opportunity to get very confused. So I will give a short answer here and hope that I don't lead anyone astray. You're talking about expenditure authority, not money. Money is a different issue. When I talk about fund reserves, we can revisit that issue. But in terms of expenditure authority on the capital side, not the operating budget side, which is a different issue, on the capital side, there are 2 ways that we control expenditures. One of them is on a per project basis. So every project has an authorized total project cost. That limit is independent of time, has nothing to do with the year, which is typical for capital expense management, right? You don't know exactly what the timing of your project will be. So you authorize a single total project cost and that carries through with the project. We also have a limit on total capital spending in any given year. And that's what the green bars here are. That is the total limit on what we can spend in any one year. That authority, I'm not quite sure how to describe this. It doesn't need to carry over because or another way to put it is it sort of automatically carries over because we reset the authority for the total authority for a given year in the next year. I think the root of your question, Commissioner Freeze, comes more from an annual limit sort of situation, which is typical of the operating budget. Did that help or hurt?
Well, both actually. So it of course, as these things go, right, it begs another question. So just so I'm clear, I will describe the process, Bill, that I am used to, and you can tell me where we differentiate, right? So I totally understand that each project has a set budget limit. I get that. That is true for the City of Madison as well. But oftentimes with the budgets I'm familiar with, say I have a huge project Okay, and for me, our projects are of a different scale than yours. So for me, a huge project might be $10 million. There is no way that I can authorize that kind of funding in any given year, right? Because it would essentially be all of my budget. That would be the only thing I could do for any given year. So what normally happens, especially since for capital projects, big capital projects, right? The design, permit, build process takes, somewhere between 3 and 4 years sometimes for big capital projects. What we will do is we will start funding a project in 1 year and, maybe put in 2 million 1 year, 3 million the next, 3 million the next, so that in year 4, when I want to actually put this out to bid, I have, what did I add up to in my estimate there? It's $8 million worth of authorization, right? From prior budgets. So I guess and then if you looked at my annual budget for a capital budget, right? I would, now again, I'm not talking money. I totally get that difference as well, right? So if I looked at, let's say I did that in my example, and I did that over years 2020, 21, 22, but I was going to bid that in 23. The 23 capital budget would not even show that project, that specific project, right? Because I'm not asking for any more money. I have that authorization from prior budgets. So does that help clarify my question, Bill? I know this is a little esoteric and I apologize.
Let's try this. The way we I'm inviting you to take a look at the draft CIP when it goes online with this question in mind. The way we represent what you just described is a table that lists all individual projects with their total authorization, independent of time, and then an estimate of what will be spent on each one of those projects in the succeeding budget year. And we refresh that estimate each year as we update the CIP. So our estimate of spending for, say, 2024 is our best estimate, with a little caution, of everything we might need to spend in that year. So whereas your experience is to sort of mark expenditure authority over a couple of years, and then you've sort of built it up kind of behind the scenes, we represent that buildup in the green bars for each of the years going forward.
That helped. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ken?
So Bill, I have another question along those lines. So if I'm looking at the graph at 2022, the difference in actual and budgeted is like 14 million. Is that 14 million included in 2023's $32 million budget?
Well, sort of. The 32 is our best estimate of what we're going to spend in 23. So the underspending in prior years is sort of reflected there, but we may also adjust the 23 numbers saying, oh my goodness, this project is going to be a little slower or a little faster. So in a sense, yes, but it's not literally just a strict carryover. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that's right, because there's a little bit of a lag effect here too. When the 23 budget is set, is still in 2022, and we don't know the final spending. So to the extent that we know how much a project costs in 2022, if that helps.
Yeah. I guess the root of my question here is if our actual expenditures are lower than budget for 22 and 23, does that help? Is that factor that drives the high 48 million in 2024 because we underspent our budgeted amount?
I would say yes, that's in general true.
I agree. I would phrase it as it's the story. The story is not so much we didn't spend money, therefore we have to. It's we didn't finish the work, therefore we have to keep working on things.
Understood. That sounds good. I appreciate the
Yeah, and again, it's
So-
like, the construction maybe that was supposed to happen in 2023 and for whatever reason got delayed is being represented in those out years then in 2024 and 2025.
Yeah, so there's always some carryover there.
Exactly.
Okay.
It kind of gets back to that budget issue we had last winter, where there was things that weren't done in time and from the prior year. I've got a question, Todd.
Mhm.
So you're talking about the dissolved oxygen with the blowers and everything.
Mhm.
And Beth asked a question, one of the questions I was going to ask, but I had another one. So you talked about how you're going to do part of it and see if it works. And so two questions, actually. What happens if it doesn't work? I know you don't do the other ones, but then do you have to go back and replace what you did? And then kind of on a follow-up to that, there's no way to do this pilot on a much smaller scale, is there?
Good questions. I was afraid you were going to ask me the first one about what we do. I'll answer the second one first. And we have done this at a pilot scale, but and everything doesn't scale up perfectly, right? So we've done this, on bench scale and pilot scale, and it's both worked. I should stress that. And this has worked other places. So it's not high risk, I will say. As far as what happens if it doesn't work, it's not like you have to throw the whole process away. That it's tweaks, I would say, to the design. It's not a wholesale rip everything out and start over. Because a lot of this is controlling the amount of air that you're releasing to the tank. So the basic infrastructure is still the same.
Okay, and then on the generator issue, you're talking about either putting in new generators, some of which we just completely rehabilitated, or you're talking about selling the gas. And so there's going to be two complete different models there.
Mhm.
One probably more expensive than the other. I would think the new generator would be more expensive, plus the maintenance cost. So your design will get to a certain point and make that decision before you then, because you're not fully designing both options, are you?
Correct. And we hope to make the decision very early. And this is actually facility planning, which is a whole level before design.
Right.
This is really looking at the pros and cons, the life cycle costs, where we want to go in the big picture. So we hope to make that decision very early in 2024 if we can, and then really dive into the details on the selected alternative.
Okay, so you don't have the facility planning done yet,
No.
so how do you get the design and construction costs? We're using that from the energy master plan?
Yes. These are planning level estimates for sure, but
Okay,
at this stage, they're saying they're essentially equal for purposes of comparison,
okay,
the life cycle costs.
Yep.
Mhm.
okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Anybody else? Okay, I think you guys can continue with the interceptor portion.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all the questions. Great questions. For the interceptor, then I guess our projects fit into mainly 4 of our systems. We have the points of the compass in there between. So I'd like to start with the Northeast Interceptor System. This is a system that we put a lot of money into the last 20 years, and it's shown by the yellow bubble here. So it extends from our Station 18 up through the city of Madison and serves outlying villages of Wanakee and DeForest. And a lot of the projects in the past 20 years have dealt with adding capacity due to growth in Wanakee and DeForest, but also to condition due to significant industrial users in these communities that discharge high strength waste into the sewer. And then due to the long travel time it takes to get to the plant, that waste is very hard on the concrete sewers that make up the system. So we've invested a lot of money to keep that sewer in working order. Roughly half of the length has either been replaced or rehabilitated during that time. So more work continues though on those initiatives. The biggest project that we're looking at in the 2024 plan is to provide additional capacity to what we call our Wanakee extension. You'll see phase 1 here scheduled for 2024 and 2025. It's a large project, $12 million. And then subsequent phases will follow as the need arises. Another large project that we're looking at is to rehabilitate what we call our Truax extension, B5, which is located just south and east of the Dane County Regional Airport. And again, this is a large project, $8.2 million that we also hope to start next year. And then beyond that, then there's other rehab projects that we'll be undertaking in later years of the plan. The next system that we've invested pretty heavily in over the years is our West Interceptor system. So this is in the west side of Madison, I will say. This is a long history. The first sewer actually that the district built was built in the early 1930s to serve the village of Middleton at the time. There was a relief sewer that was installed then along the University Avenue corridor in 1959. And then starting in 1999, we began a series of projects on the west side of the UW-Madison campus to increase capacity as well. So those are complete and are extended out to Walnut Street right now. And then you're probably more familiar with the shorewood relief projects that we've introduced here in the last 5 years, which will complete the improvements from Walnut Street out to Whitney Way. Phases 1 and 2 of the shorewood relief are essentially complete, but we still have phase 3 to do, which involves construction next year, we hope, near the Shorewood Hills swimming pool and also the UW hospital. So it's a very complex project. And then in addition to that, we have some smaller rehab projects that will address some older sewers that are nearing 100 years of age out near Hilldale Mall and also Babcock Hall, some rehab work in 2024 and 2026. The next system is the Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor. You probably heard a lot about this over the last year with different approvals coming before the commission. Essentially, this is a project to complete the improvements that we started in the early 2000s to extend service from our pumping station 17 up along the valley up to Midtown Road to relieve the city of Madison's lift station there. So when this happens, all the flow then north of Midtown Road will be able to make its way down to pump station 17. Phases 5 and 6 are currently in design. Actually, phase 5 is out for bid and we'll get bids in this coming Monday. And then pump station 17, firm capacity improvements are needed to treat this additional flow. And of course, you've heard about the force main additional capacity for that project as well. So those are all in various stages of design and they should all be under construction at sometime next year. And then the final interceptor system I'd like to talk about is the Nine Springs Valley intercepting system. As they like to say in our industry, stuff flows downhill. And so everything from Verona passes into this system, which starts basically at our pump station 12 on Fitch Verona Road and travels along the E-Way to our pump station 11, which is located just south of the plant. So this is a very long corridor that needs capacity improvements. It's about 30,000 feet of large diameter pipes. So the first phase of improvements will begin construction is scheduled for 2027. The planning will begin a few years before that. And the first phase is from station 11 out to Highway 14. Moving out of the pump station category, you'll notice in our CIP that this level of spending for pump stations or as a percentage of our total CIP is going down slightly. And that's because many of our stations have been rehabbed over the last 20 years. So we've done major rehabs at 11 of our 18 pump stations over the last 20 years. So we're kind of getting through that cycle. There's 3 more still in this plan. You saw station 17 on a previous slide. This is pump station 4, which was awarded to JFA Hearn, the construction contract in December of last year. The construction is in progress. At this point, it's mainly doing shop drawing reviews and ordering materials, but construction is on schedule and it should ramp up here this fall. Then the last project really in the cycle of major rehabs is our pumping station 16, located in the city of Middleton. This will be a typical rehab for the most part, electrical, mechanicals, and HVAC. The picture you're actually seeing here is from a major repair that we did to the station piping in 2017, where we had a leaking T in the station and required emergency shutdown. So we'll replace all the interior piping that needs to be replaced, and also do some force main rehab downstream of the station. Once we get through the cycle of pump station rehabs, we'll be able to address other initiatives at our pumping station. And one of those, the major one, is emergency power generation. Right now, we only have 5 standby generators at our pumping stations out of 18. The goal of this project then is to complete generator installs at the remaining 13 stations, and that'll be done in phases between 2026 and 2032. And then finally, in the last category of the plan, capital plan expenses is the major project is the Badger Mill Creek phosphorus compliance. As the commission is well aware, this project has been scaled back. We had an allocation of $13 million in last year's plan to address possible tertiary treatment at the plant. We scaled that back to $1.8 million for spending for stream habitat and also to engage stakeholders and getting those stream habitat improvements implemented. So less in this plan than there have been in previous years. And with that, I'm through my portion of the presentation. I'll take again any questions that I have, or otherwise I'll turn it over to Bill.
Okay, Todd, thank you. Marcia, you've got a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we have a tree policy plan in place when we do this interceptor work? Because I gotta say, just as anecdotally in my older life, when I hear, before serving on this board, when I would hear about you, it would be like you're killing trees. So do we address that question in ways I just don't know about yet?
We don't. So I had a former life at the City of Madison Engineering Department myself, and I know they had a very formal tree policy plan. The district doesn't have one of those. We generally try to work with the communities and what their plans are. But that's a good suggestion, I think, to adopt a plan like that.
Well, given climate collapse, trees are even more important. And if you take, if you have a way to route around some, mature tree stands, I think we should.
Yeah, I will say that on our Pump Station 17 Forest Main project, we invested a lot of time and effort, hiring specialists to identify trees that were of value to the community, and we're trying to work around that. We've spent considerable effort to do that, but we don't have a formal policy per se.
I think it's something I hope you will look at. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Ezra, go ahead.
Thanks for the good presentation. I'm just thinking about that last piece you covered. I'm sure we'll see the details when we see the plan, but we all are familiar with the $1 million we approved for Badger Mill Creek phosphorus compliance to help cover costs of projects in the watershed. The other $0.8 million. Can you give us a little bit of a summary of what cost those that's covering?
At a broad level, it's for staff time certainly, and to engage consultants in helping the stakeholder engagement. I'd have to defer to Marty for details of that breakdown.
I wondered if there are costs related to that would probably happen within this capital plan of 6 years, related to turning off the flow and decommissioning to the extent we're going to do that. Is there any other pieces like that do fit in this capital plan, or is that not capital, I suppose, maybe?
I'm not aware of those specific costs at this time.
Okay.
But they certainly could be added in subsequent plans if that's deemed necessary.
Sure. All right, thanks, Todd. We'll keep an eye for details in the plan.
So I get kind of a follow-up to Ezra. So if we decommission the return effluent line, what do you do? Do you have to put in concrete in the manholes, or fill the line, or do you just let it be and let it sit and rot in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you try to want to get all the water out at a minimum to the extent you can. And then, we've investigated various possibilities for repurposing that line. It has limited value in that sense from what we've done so far. But yeah, I think provisions will have to be made to properly abandon the various structures that are along it, because it's a very long pipeline.
Yeah, could you use the easements for that for the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor capacity relief?
Possibly.
We're the same line.
We're very early in that design, and it doesn't follow the natural drainage draw, but perhaps in spots that might be possible.
Yeah. Okay. I got one other question. You were talking a lot about the pump stations, how we've moved through. We have a few left, moved through many over the past 20 years. So how long do you think those pump station, if the earliest one was done 20 years ago, rehabilitation, how long does that rehabilitation or reconstruction last? I mean,
Yeah, great
does
question.
the stuff
So
age out in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years?
it varies. So a lot of our stations were put in the, in the 50s and 60s, and we started tackling the major rehabs in the early 2000s. So I would say by that measure, say 40 years.
Okay.
I don't think they'll last that long these days because the equipment is, while it's much more complex and sophisticated, it also doesn't last as long. So I think what you'll see going forward is that we do smaller rehabs more often and don't wait for these major rehabs that replace all the equipment at one time.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Brad?
Yeah, just another question, follow up on Badger Mills Creek compliance. I noted that it was kind of interesting that we're estimating that it may cost $800,000 for us to spend $1 million on improvements to the stream habitat, et cetera, which I guess isn't surprising. But just a question about how staff time expenses are attributed to the capital budget. Would that also include all of the outreach meetings that we're going to be holding to work with various stakeholders to prepare for the meetings, have the meetings, follow up on the meetings? Is that also included in what we're going to charge to the capital budget?
It is, and I should point out that this total project budget of 1.8 million, and this is not going forward. This is costs, also includes cost to date. So there's been a significant amount of effort that's already gone into the analysis and the studies, and that's included in this total project budget. So we're not going to spend another $800,000 in stakeholder engagement. Some of those costs are already sunk.
Oh, okay.
If that helps.
And the expenditures have already been made, but and those expenditures are being covered by the past budgets and current budget, not the budgets going forward.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. Anybody else? Okay, I guess then that takes us to Bill.
It does. Now tell me if my screen is being shared correctly.
Yep. We can see
Yep,
it.
can see it.
Excellent. All righty. You just heard all about the spending side of the CIP, and it's my turn to talk about the financing side, by which I mean, how do we make sure that we have the money we need at the right time? And I will not bury the lead. Here is the lead. The high levels of rehabilitation spending that Todd described mean that the 6-year financing plan relies a lot on debt. We will be maintaining fund reserves sort of on the lower end, still adequate, but not very much so. And we will be seeing, here's your question, Commissioner Clark, service charge increases in the range of 8.5% to 10% per year over the planning period. Now I will back up and tell you how those points came to be in the following steps. I want to say a little bit about the method of making a financing plan, just a little context. Touch on some of the assumptions that are in this plan. Todd already touched on them, but I think they're very important to understand this year, so I'll repeat them. And then describe the components of the plan. What does our use of debt look like? What do fund reserves look like? And then service charges. And I'll pause occasionally for some questions. So talking about method, a financing plan for a utility like us is 4 factors in tension. How much are we going to spend? How much are we going to borrow? How strong will our cash reserves be? And what will our service charges be? And their intention like this, if for instance, you need to increase spending, then you have to compensate for that by either borrowing more, spending down your reserves further, or increasing your service charges, or some combination of the 3. So for us generally, and for this plan, when we start developing the plan, spending is more or less set. We do a lot of work, as Todd described, figuring out what project requirements are and how best to schedule that work. And we've got that more or less settled when we start working on the financing plan. For this coming few years, reserves are also more or less set. There's a policy issue of how much additional reserve capacity one could have. But as I indicated, we've designed this plan so that we're more or less at the minimum practical reserve levels, which remains policy that leaves policy issues between debt and service charges. If you wanted to lower use of debt, you would have to offset that with increased service charges. But to be clear, that's only in the short run. In the long run, obviously, lower debt means lower total cost because you're not paying interest. But in my experience, in more than 20 years in government, most people are interested in the short run when it comes to spending. Touch on some of the assumptions. Todd indicated we're facing some, let's call them macroeconomic headwinds. Inflation, and yes, I know that yesterday's inflation report was lower, but the point here is we're talking about construction costs remaining high. So our plan keeps those values at 5% per year for a few years and then dropping near the end of the plan. Loan costs to us are higher. The Clean Water Fund loan program is at 2.5% now. We assume it'll stay there for several years and then drop back down. And as Todd indicated, connection charges are already lower, and we forecast that to continue. This plan is assuming implicitly that we are able to manage the workload that we've programmed in, and we're relying heavily here on the 3 additional engineering positions that were authorized previously. And the financing plan is assuming that high levels of spending continue. We're showing you a 6-year window, but we're very cognizant of the needs going forward. We don't model them in specific detail, but we're not taking our foot off the gas, as it were, in terms of financial readiness. All right, let's talk about the substance, debt levels. When you think about debt, it's important to evaluate debt by its effect on the organization. To what extent do debt levels impact your ability as an organization to meet your strategic goals? And for us, I think there are 3 factors to focus on. One of them, obviously, is what are you spending in interest, and is that acceptable? And as I indicated earlier, the sort of intention impact on short-run service charges. And then finally, something that my impression is has been of interest to people in the past. Can you get into a situation where you're actually having difficulty repaying? That's not the case for us, as I will show. So let me contextualize the use of debt in our plan. I'm going to show you a bunch of financial graphs here, and they all have the same basic structure, going from the year 2018 through the year 2029, so historical actuals and forecast future. This is a graph showing you principal obligations, not debt service, but what we owe as of the end of each year. And the theme here is that total principal and interest obligations will rise under this plan to about $260, $270 million by the end of the plan. One other way to contextualize use of debt is its debt relative to spending. So this is a graph of the percentage of capital expenses for which we borrow. And I'm graphing a 2-year moving average here because otherwise it would jump all around and obscure the point. And the theme of this slide, as will be the case for several of other slides, is on a relative basis, our use of debt is stable. We are continuing to borrow for roughly 70 to 80% of our capital expenses. That is close to the maximum of what we are able to borrow for under the Clean Water Fund loan program. Many of our expenses are not eligible for the subsidized rate that makes the loan program attractive. We could go lower, but not really much higher. Now, talk about interest here a little bit. I'm showing you again interest on a relative basis. So interest payments as a percentage of our service charge revenue, again, stays relatively stable over the planning period, about 7% of service charges. The actual total amount of interest payments are in the CIP. I'm going to make you do your own homework and look that up. I want to start talking a little bit about impacts relative to service charges. This graph, the yellow bars are exactly the same information I just showed you. And what I've added here is principal payments as a percentage of service charges. And the point of this graph, again, is that sort of stability on a relative basis theme. Roughly 26, 27, 30% of our service charges going forward are dedicated to debt service. Now let's talk a little bit about this issue of ability to repay. This is a very complicated graph. Again, same structure, 2018 to 2029, and there are three things being shown here. The orange bar is our total debt obligations, principal and interest combined. Those bars are the same, telling you the same thing as the first graph I showed you, and they're keyed to the axis on the left. So obligations rising again to about $260 million. The green bar is service charge revenue, and the black line is the ratio of the two. So by 2029, our total obligations will be roughly 3 times our annual service charges. Now, the way to interpret this graph, the reason this graph is here, is it is a way to think about hypothetically, if we had to pay off all of our debt obligations in a short period of time, what would we have to do to service charges to accomplish that? We would have to collect an additional 3 times our normal service charge revenue to pay off all of our debt. Now, there are no objective standards for what is too much or too little, but I'm providing this as sort of an intuitive context for you about how large is our debt in terms of ability to repay. There is an objective standard that we can use, and it is a constitutional limit that we face as a local government. We may not carry debt obligations larger than 5% of the property value of the district. The red line is that limit, and the line at the bottom is the actual percentage. So under this plan, with certain assumptions about growth in the value of the district's property in the district's region, we are at about 0.3%. And the way to think about this limit is similar to what I was illustrating with service charges. The reason there is a constitutional limit is to prevent local governments from getting a debt load that exceeds their ability to repay. And this is illustrating that we are not close to that. So that's debt, growing use of debt, but on a relative basis, consistent with what we've been doing. And I will pause right here and ask for some debt questions before I go on to reserves.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Anybody have any debt questions? Beth?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I do have a couple of questions. One is going back to that chart that showed the increase in capital expenses. It looked to me from that chart that there was a big increase in borrowing between back further, actually.
How much?
I don't know.
There isn't any further.
Okay, so there was one that you showed, that one. There, it
Percentage,
looked like
yes.
a big increase between 2019 and 2020. Is that right?
Yes. So what's going on here is, generally speaking, our construction goes through phases. And if you're in a primarily planning phase, you're not borrowing for that. It's when you move into a construction phase that you're borrowing for. Now, we have a whole bunch of different projects on different schedules, but the high level way to understand what's going on when you have a big swing like that is we moved into construction. And the theme going forward is we have a lot of things in construction. So we're staying sort of at that high percentage borrowing level.
So if we would go back to, say, 2008 to 2018, would we see a more level type spending? I mean, I'm just kind of reacting to that big jump. I
Right.
guess.
Don't quote me on this, but I think what you would see is similar waves over time, because particularly in the past, we tended to group our construction projects into what we called additions. So very large pushes over several years to do a whole bunch of construction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, I guess that helps a little bit. And then I guess I'm just reacting that about 30% of our service charges is for repaying debt.
Yes,
Just seems like a big number to me. Is that typical for,
right. The,
it just seems like a lot to me.
let me make two comments here. So the principal repayment is less relevant to your question because it's principal, it's capital expense. We'd have to pay it at some point anyway, right?
Yep.
To do the projects. I think this graph is a better way to think about your question. 6 to 7% of our service charges are paying for the privilege of borrowing. And your question of, is that a lot, is one that my staff and I have talked about extensively for several years. We've done a bunch of research on standards in this area. And the difficulty here is there is really no objective standard that we can look to tell us what is the right level. And this was my opening comment. You have to judge debt in terms of its impact on the organization's strategic performance. And different utilities have very different uses of debt. Some utilities are funded primarily through a property tax, and they lean more heavily on that than we do. Utilities that are in a very heavy capital phase, like we're going into, will tend to use more debt, because the alternative to this debt level here is very high short-term service charge increases. What debt is accomplishing for us is letting us get through this period of high spending without an immediate impact on ratepayers. But of course, long-term, total cost of ownership is higher.
Yeah, I thanks. That helps. I still kind of struggle with that, but yeah, thanks.
Okay, Ken, you've got a question?
Yeah, a couple, Bill. I agree with your opinions on debt in an organization. So of 10% forecasted increase in service charges,
Yeah, you're
I'm
talking
actually a little bit different. Is
about
that what percentage of that 10% increase, let's say for next year, is due to our CIP? 30% of that?
the capital program is, I don't want to answer that question off the top of my head. It is roughly 2/3 of our total spending. Please don't remember that figure. I will get the correct answer and give it to you at the next meeting.
That would be helpful. I'm simply referring back to some feedback we received last fall regarding our budget for 2023 from our member communities and their displeasure at 9% increases for the next 5 years. And
The thing I will say here, and this is the bind that we feel acutely, and part of the job of this presentation is to make you feel it acutely. As Todd was indicating in one of his early slides, we're in a very heavy rehabilitation phase. We're a utility. We have permit obligations. We have reliability obligations. So the bottom line driver of the increase in service charges is fundamentally our need to meet those capital requirements. You see it reflected on the project side, but you also see it on the operating budget side, because we need staff to do all of those projects. And that's, I don't know what else to say other than that's kind of the way it is to be a utility in the 2020s.
Understood. And I think the graph that Todd had that had the condition and the capacity, those dollars that were like the cause dollars, however you want to describe that, was helpful to me. The other question I have is regarding our cash that we have in the bank. Is there any way to, maybe we're already looking at this, but is there any way to get a return on that, short-term return on that while interest rates are, at least benefit a little bit from that? And maybe we already are.
So this is a little bit beyond my knowledge, because this is a question for the accounting team, but we do invest our holdings in various things. I believe that we're not able to invest in a way that's going to yield too much because we have some don't take risk obligations as a government, just sort of prudential caution. But we do definitely invest our stuff, and we do have interest revenue that appears in our various funds.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I don't see any hands up. I got a question for you, Bill. So Ken was just talking about the capacity and the projects. And so currently we have 2 of those 3 extra engineer positions filled. So where's the third one sit? And can we take it that we would not see another request like we did a couple of years ago to add more engineers later on to help make this capacity? Or are you trying to balance the capacity that we have of people to the capacity of the work to balance the 2?
This is a question that Lisa Coleman, our Director of Engineering, really should be answering.
Sure, I can take it.
Go for it.
Well, part of it is, so we got 2 hired. Part of it is Lisa just walks in the door, give her a minute to figure out what she needs before she starts hiring people. So I'll answer it that way a little bit. So I feel like we've done a really good job with with getting the 2 on board. Also seeing last year, having been involved with when Kathy was the director and helping with those hires, just seeing the shortage of the labor market right now, and the consultants pay more, frankly, than us. So shortage of that, seeing that it takes a long time to find somebody good, putting a little pause on to make sure I'm looking for the right people to bring in the door. If that answers the question. As far as the third one, I do expect that we'll be looking to try to fill that later in this calendar year. I expect we'll be recruiting for that. But part of it, again, was me trying to figure out, okay, of these 3 positions, who do I really need for this? Do I need people that are interceptor building type people? Do I need people that are, have expertise in the plant? Do I need, which sorts of people do I need? So I'm feeling more comfortable that I know those answers now, but, and I feel like we're doing good that we've got 2 out of 3 really good people.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, but the last part is you don't see asking for more than the 3.
No, not at this time. Maybe later. Yeah, definitely not in.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get an idea. Are we looking at an ask a year from now, 2 years from now, or
I'm not looking at anything for 2024
after this plan?
Yeah, no, not anything for 2024 for sure.
I want to add a comment on this. When we are, as an executive team, developing our 2024 operating budget, and today we're talking about execution on capital projects for which engineering department staff are key. But maintenance and rehabilitation of all of our assets involves other departments as well, as does capital planning. So we are discussing internally potential need for positions, not in engineering to do capital projects, but to support the capital program and reliability of our infrastructure more generally. And we have not finished those discussions. We're not sure exactly what we need immediately and how many positions it may be. But I want to plant that idea in your minds that you are going to see some position requests in the 2024 operating budget, and some of them are capital program related, but they're not project engineers.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a work in progress. Brad?
Yep, it's also directly related, Tom, to your questions related to the graph about which really was quite interesting, that showed essentially over the last 5 years, we've spent about 50% or less of the capital expenditures that were authorized were actually spent. And Lisa is basically, you're in the process of trying to play catch up now, going forward. And we've got a significant increase in the level of capital expenditures projected out the next 5 years. I think in part because we haven't been able to complete the projects that we had budgeted over the last 5 years. And I think it's going to be a significant challenge to move forward with all of the projects that we had budgeted. And I don't want to say I'm overly concerned about that at this point, but it appears that we're pushing forward projects that we really have wanted to have completed at this point. So I don't know what the point is, but that becomes a more significant issue as we look forward. If we get 5 years into the future in 2028, and we've had the same experience that we've had over the last 5 years, that seems like that's a problem. Good luck with hiring that last position. And I like Bill's comment that you're not in a position to say that we're not going to ask for additional staff at this point, because we don't know what we don't know. And I'll look forward to those discussions as we get into the budget for next year. But thank you for the presentation up to this point. I think it's been very informative.
I would like to make a comment here, which I think will be useful context for everyone following up on your comment. Behind the scene, a little bit peek behind the scenes, Lisa, Todd and I, and our director of O&M, Eric Dundee, we had I forget how many, series of 3, 4, 5 meetings internally looking at exactly the issue you raised. What is a realistic pace of work? What can we actually get done? Who is going to be responsible for each project? We did make some adjustments, again, behind the scenes. You don't see them, sort of pushing some projects out into the future, recognizing that we weren't going to be able to get them done. We share that concern. We have programmed a lot of work in here, and it's going to take some attention. We think we're up to it, but we're going to be paying attention in the same way that you just suggested, because we don't want to continue this trend. The urgency of some of our infrastructure stuff is pretty high, and we need to get some work done. All righty.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, Bill, so you can continue.
Third component of a financing plan is the cash you have on hand, reserves. I'm going to talk about the capital fund and the debt fund separately. The job of a reserve is to make sure you don't run out of money. And I'm not talking about a day-to-day basis. The accounting team manages all of our funds on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. I'm talking about year-to-year basis, planning at the scale that my department does. There are, for the capital fund, 2 specific risks relevant to running out of money. One of them, and this is extremely important, is the risk of delayed loan proceeds. And what you have to understand here is the Clean Water Fund Loan Program is a reimbursement program. We spend on projects first, and then we get reimbursed for that spending. Most of you are used to loans that go the other way around. A home equity loan, you get the money first, then you remodel your kitchen. You do a bond issue as a local government, then you repair the road. We spend first and get reimbursed. And the delay between spending and reimbursement, generally speaking, is on the order of a year or more. So we are covering our costs for that period of time. And for a variety of reasons, our experience is that sometimes the delay can be even longer, and we need to guard against that. And the way that we're doing that is we have set a minimum target of half of our non-cash spending, non-cash meaning debt-supported spending. Spending that's covered by service charges or connection charge revenue, that's not very variable. We're fine. We don't have to worry about that. It's loan proceeds we're concerned about. Obviously, 100% confidence or 100% coverage, that would be perfect. In fact, that is the requirement in the debt fund, as I'll say in a minute. Based on our sort of experience running this program, 50% seems reasonable. The other risk we face is the risk of a truly unplanned expense. And the challenge here is unplanned expenses come in all different sizes. If it's very large, say $5–10 million, we will address it over a period of time that gives us time to collect revenue, or we're loan funding it, which allows us to spread things out. So we're talking smaller end. Our minimum reserve, which I'll show you on a graph in a moment, covers $500,000 in unplanned expenses. I personally think that is not very much. It isn't very much, but it's not unreasonable. So my point in the lead that our reserves are sort of on the low end, that this point I just made reflects that. So here's a graph of the capital fund. Again, same time period. The line is the closing balance at the end of the year. And the red zone is the two factors I just illustrated. So the red zone moves around because it is a function of our spending. And the sort of close to the edge point is represented here visually. Again, this is fine. I'm not super concerned about this. We're out of the red zone. I would be more comfortable if we are out of the yellow zone, but it's okay. To get out of that zone would require additional service charge revenue, and that doesn't seem like something that's going to be viable right now. Debt fund, same goal, don't run out of money, but the risk factors are a little bit different. As I alluded to, there is a rule under the Clean Water Fund program that we have to have on hand 100% of next year's debt service. And we actually have to have it by October. And so we program our plan to be able to meet that requirement. By the way, if we don't meet that requirement in any given year, we have to go out and collect a property tax. The other risk is not of sort of an immediate unplanned expense, but that we will find a large future borrowing need near the end of the plan. And the way we cover this risk is we have programmed in a reserve of about $3 million in the last year. That is enough to cover 1 year of a $50 million loan at roughly our current rates. And we sort of build up to that $3 million over the last couple of years of the plan. So those two factors are illustrated here with the red zone. And again, we're sort of close to it, but we're okay. You may notice something, which you might have noticed on the previous graph. The balance in the debt fund is relatively high up until 23, and then it drops in 24. And there's a course, so that the balance in the debt fund has been too high. This is a reflection of the slower spending that we've been talking about. What we do in 2024 is we do a rebalancing. We raise the balance in the capital fund and we lower it in the debt service fund. That's just a straight up switch. So that's reserves, enough to meet what seem to be sort of practical and kind of regulatory requirements, not super high, but adequate. I'll pause here, see if there are any questions on fund reserves or cash flow.
Okay, let's see. Ezra, you have a question?
Bill, I'm just thinking about, the concept of the red zone makes a ton of sense. I am assuming there's a tie back to our adopted policies at the commission level there.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe just make that a more direct connection for folks, both those of us who've been here a while and those of us who are newer, because I think it might be valuable here.
Sure. I'll do a short version of this because we could go on a long time on it, but sticking here with the debt fund. So there are commission policies on reserves in the commission policy book. And then there was some additional commission direction in a meeting a couple of years ago. I'm going to forget when it was. The debt fund graph, most of that red zone reflects commission policy and clean water fund requirements, next year's spending. The additional direction is to sort of, I'm not sure how to describe it, maintain enough caution so that you don't run into trouble. And that's what that slice for additional borrowing is. I think I'm going to go back to the capital fund here. The formal commission policy on reserves is to stay above $3 million closing balance, or I believe it's 10% of next year's expenses. So we're considerably higher than that in the red zone. And the reason for that is that in order to be sure that we meet commission policy, given the high flow of money in and out of the fund and the potential for delay, we need to be at this higher level. So this higher level is sort of a practical requirement to meet the formal restriction that is in the commission policies. Does that make sense? Does that, you think that's enough here?
Thanks for that, Bill.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else? I think a lot of that, what Bill was just covering was that Jeff Brocktrop used to talk about in terms of the cash reserves being on hand to fund different expenses throughout the year. Okay, Bill, is that it, or do you have more to?
Oh, we have the most interesting part of the topic is service
Okay,
charges.
the service charges, yeah.
We're collecting service charges to meet the needs that I have just described. We have to be able to cover capital expenditures. We have to be able to pay our debt service. We have to fund the reserves that I just described. We have to be able to pay for the operating budget, which I've alluded to. That's not the theme of today's presentation. That's for a future meeting. In constructing the 6-year financing plan, we make a forecast of the operating budget. It's much easier to forecast the capital fund because it's on a multi-year project basis, but we do use a sort of general forecast of the operating budget. And then that yields a service charge path. I put the word smooth in here because we also have had some commission direction in the last couple of years, which is reasonable direction. Please don't have very large increases in one year and then small increases in the next in service charge. Let's keep a steady growth. And we accomplish that through management of fund reserves. On the graph I'm about to show you, there is the service charge path I described, and then a margin of error. And this margin of error is both a reflection of the genuine uncertainty we have in forecasting the future, and also a bit of an editorial comment. I know that if I put a specific line up there that says X%, many people will regard that as a promise or a commitment, and that's not what it is. This is a financing plan. We're talking about the future. We are making a forecast based on assumptions. Things will change. But to give you a general sense of what we're looking at what we're facing in terms of service charges, I'm including a margin of error, and here's that graph. The historical line is the budgeted increase in service charges. The actual service charge changes jump all over the place because of revenue variation. And what's most interesting here is this zone moving forward. This is the margin of error. Sort of, we can expect service charges under this plan to remain in the range of 8.5% to 10% per year. Now I'm guessing a natural question would be, what would it take to lower that range down? If we wanted to, for illustration purposes, lower that range by a percentage point. So now we're, instead of being between 8.5 and 10, we're between 7.5 and 9. What would we have to do to accomplish that? We would have to collect a total of about $15.6 million less over the 6-year period. If we left spending as it is and reduced collections to this degree and had all that impact follow on the capital fund, this is what the fund would look like. So the red zone, the reserve requirement, doesn't change at all because we haven't changed our spending. But the balance gradually declines to the point where we are literally out of money, more than out of money, by the end of the plan. So in order to accomplish a 1 percentage point decline in the service charge path without having this happen, we would have to identify $15 million less in spending over the period. And one thing to realize here, for those of you who don't spend all day constructing fund conditions, delay doesn't really help unless it's delay over 6, 7, 8 years. Delay of a year or two doesn't help you in a 6-year plan. It just moves things around a little bit. We would have to identify work that does not need to be done. And this gets me to, I think, the real theme of a financing plan. The job of a financing plan is to make it so that we are planning ahead so that in the event we have the spending that we have identified as needing, we are able to handle that spending when the time comes without having to do a large single-year service charge increase. The growth is to gradually, or the goal is to gradually grow and be ready to handle the needs that we forecast in the future. So that's service charges. I'll talk about next steps and then take additional questions. The first next step is to take any other questions you have on any topic here today. At the next meeting, July 27th, which by the way is in person, we will ask you to, quote, accept this plan. And that word acceptance is meaningful. The draft capital plan does not authorize any spending or any other action. Spending is authorized through budgets and transaction approvals. This plan is to describe what we think is coming. We ask you to accept it to signal that you've seen it, you understand it, you don't have any major deal-breaking objections. Also at the next meeting is an opportunity for you to offer some sort of general policy guidance for the 2024 budget. Now, I have to acknowledge here that there's not a lot of room to maneuver. This is something we struggle with. I think you struggle with it as well. But if there are things you want to provide general direction on, like specific projects that perhaps you think are not necessary, you question. If you would like to raise reserves, you can indicate that. I hope you don't ask us to reduce them, but that's an option. Or if you have directions on debt, love to hear those things. I alluded to operating budget. The sort of ultimate next step begins on September 14th, where we introduce the comprehensive operating budget, which will include the capital plan, the capital budget, the debt budget. That's everything I have. What other questions do people have today?
Okay, thanks, Bill. Anybody have any additional questions? I don't see any hands up. I guess I just want to make one observation. So we're looking at, this is a 6-year plan, and for each of the 6 years, as you showed with the service charges, that the rate increase will be between 8.5% and 10%. So I know we're not only looking out 6 years, but at some point, I hope that we can realize that we can give some relief to our customer communities and our customers by going back to a lower rate increase. Or for some reason, I'm getting the feeling that this 8 to 10% is going to be the new normal. And I guess I hope that's not the case. And that's, because last year we were talking about 3 to 4 years of 9% increases. Now all of a sudden it's 6 years. And, we had a number of communities didn't like the 9% increase last year. So I don't know what they're going to think about it this year and for 6 more years. But that's just my observation. Sarah?
Thanks, Tom. A somewhat related question, and maybe just a request for you to repeat yourself a little bit on this particular point, Bill. Can you say more about the relationship between the higher service charges that we've been kind of slowly ramping up over time and the fact that we've actually underspent our expectations in some of those years, and just how some of the funds are being shifted relative to that? And also, I mean, frankly, right, if we hadn't been doing that, what things would look like? Anyway, consequences and implications of that over the past few years.
Very good question. If you'll recall, the graph of the debt service fund has that reduction in the balance, which is partly shifted to the capital fund. So the underspending we've experienced in the last couple of years manifests itself in balances that were, in retrospect, higher than they needed to be. But as I illustrated going forward, based on the work that we expect we will get done, balances are not going to be higher than they need to be. They will be just barely above where they need to be. So what I think your question, what the issue boils down to is, will we in fact accomplish the work that we have programmed in? The reason that we programmed that level of work in, despite the difficulties we've had recently, is, as I suggested earlier, a recognition on the part of everyone who's involved in this program that these infrastructure needs truly are urgent and important. And if we fail to get this work done, the issue is less about money management and more about genuine reliability concerns. So if we find ourselves struggling to get this work done, the implication to us is we have to find other ways to manage our work, or whether it's staffing changes or the management of projects. Don't know. I'm not the engineering director. But the fundamental reason we have designed this financing plan as we have is we see the urgency of this work and we want to make sure we have the money for it. Is that responsive to your comment?
It is, and it just, maybe I'll put an even finer point on it. I mean, to some degree, there's a question of, well, if we haven't gotten this work done, why have we continued to raise rates? And the point is, we've needed to raise rates because we are going to use the money, and we are using the money, and the amount of money we need continues to exceed our traditional rate increases of years past because of the intense capital investment needs. So I think just from a justification standpoint on rate increases for our customer and owner communities, it's important for us to understand that over time. So thank you. You were super responsive.
Okay, Greg?
Hi, Bill. One more question for you here. I just want to kind of wrap my head around where we've been over the last 4 years, because as I think, even before I became a commissioner, which was just this year, right? I had been watching, I believe I sat through and learned a bunch of things from you on the goal to move the district more to cash financing of capital versus, I see a smile, so I must not have forgotten. But as I look at what we're doing now, it feels to me that in an effort to keep rates within what I would call, I'm going to use the term reasonable, but within that right around 10%, increases right around 10%, we are shifting more back towards a debt financing model, which is where the district was kind of up till 4 years ago. That had been the policy. Am I reading this correctly?
You are. I'll give a little context for everyone here. I alluded to a commission meeting several years ago, which included some direction. That direction had 3 priorities from the commission for us in developing financing plans. Number one, keep year-over-year service charge increases smooth. Don't give us big jumps from one year to the next. Number two, maintain necessary reserves, preserve our sort of financial resilience. And number three, limit use of debt. And that is the third priority, subject to the other two. We were able to, over the last couple of years, accomplish that third, limit use of debt, a little bit. But I guess the theme of this financing plan is, given the spending levels we face and a general desire to keep service charge increases in the short run as low as possible, that implies using debt to spread out these revenue requirements over time.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? I don't see anybody with their hand up. So, okay, that completes your presentation, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for the questions.
Yes, thank you. Okay, that will take us to the Chief Engineer and Director's update. Bill, you have anything?
That's me again, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. I do have one thing. I unfortunately have to tell you that we are in the middle of a permit violation currently affecting Badger Mill Creek, but it's also going to involve Bad Fish Creek. This is something that operations is monitoring, and you will get additional information from them in future meetings. They're doing what they can to manage it. The violation is a violation of our WPDES permit for weekly average concentration effluent limit for total suspended solids, TSS. For Badger Mill Creek, that the limit is 17 milligrams per liter, and the actual value in the first week of July was 20. That exceedance will continue in the second week and will also affect, as I said, Bad Fish Creek in the second week. I'm beyond the limits of my knowledge here at this point, but there are a variety of environmental factors that are contributing to this. lower flows, high temperature, both for air and effluent, and elevated nitrogen loadings. We have told DNR about this, of course, and as I said, you will get some more technically informed information about this in coming meetings as the situation resolves. So just want to make sure you know that that's happening and that we're taking care of it. And I don't have any good news announcements to follow that one with, so that's where I have to leave it. Commissioner Hubble, you're muted.
Sorry. Vanessa, thank you, Bill. Vanessa, you're up for the regulatory.
Good morning. I wanted to make just one note really on the regulatory report that's in your packet to highlight the fact that the budget was finalized in early July, and the budget provides for $125 million for PFAS initiatives. If you recall, I had explained to the commission last month, I believe, that there is, separate from the budget process, a standalone bill that would provide for municipal grants for PFAS work, including grant funding for sampling and testing for PFAS. That bill will probably get taken back up in September when the legislature is back in session. But we're anticipating that if that bill were to proceed forward, some of that grant funding would potentially be allocated for that. Some of that the budgeted PFAS funding would be allocated towards some of those municipal grant programs. So we will continue to keep you posted on that. And I'm happy to take any questions on that or anything else in the regulatory report.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any hands up, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to the future meeting schedule. That's online. The next meeting, as Bill mentioned, will be in person. And then hopefully that Monday before, I'll be talking with Michael and we'll make a decision on the August and hopefully maybe September meeting, so we get out a couple months as to what meetings will be in person over the next. And we know we have some busy agendas coming up, not just budget, but there's other things as well on the future meeting schedule that may be best in person. Okay, any other future agenda topics or other business? If not, Tom?
I'll move we adjourn this wonderful meeting.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson. Do we have a second?
I'll second, Tom. Commissioner Clark.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Clark to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And enjoy the sun's come out today.
Yay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Talk soon.
Aye.